Two siblings duel for the throne. The brother, brash and hot-headed, the sister, cold-blooded and calculating. Despite sharing a bloodline, they could hardly be more different, and they have finally reached the end of the road along which they have traveled all their lives. Seemingly from birth, Zuko and Azula were destined to challenge each other to see who would succeed their father. And all that time, the outcome of that duel was predetermined. Azula, second child though she may have been, was always Zuko's superior in their shared fiery martial art. But now, the result of this Agni Kai is not so certain. Zuko, ever the impulsive and reckless pugilist, is now centered, calm, and controlled. By contrast, Azula's usual composed and disciplined demeanor has evaporated, leaving her on the brink of hysteria. It's a setup for a spectacular showdown that has been a long time coming. But to truly appreciate the imminent, breathtaking display of firebending, we need to take a trip down memory lane and revisit Zuko's previous Agni Kais and confrontations with Azula in order to set the stage. We begin with Zuko's Agni Kai against his own father, a duel caused by Zuko's lack of decorum and rash if good-hearted words. In this instance, Zuko is initially willing to fight until his opponent is revealed not to be the elderly Fire Nation general, but rather Ozai in all his kingly power. The young prince refuses to duel his father, at least in part because he knows it can only end in his defeat and humiliation at the hands of an adversary with far superior skill and strength. This match is echoed in Zuko's Agni Kai against Commander Zhao, another far more experienced firebender whose ferocity initially overwhelmed Zuko, who has refused his uncle's advice to stick to the basics and instead unleashed everything he had on Zhao. But here, we begin to see the hints of how Zuko will be able to match Azula so many chapters later. The very thing that makes firebenders so effective is also their greatest exploitable weakness, their aggression. The overly confident Zhao acts as Zuko had earlier in the match, attacking relentlessly, even recklessly, and Zuko takes advantage, shifting his attacks to break Zhao's stance and route, to unsettle him and put him off balance rather than trying to overpower him. Zuko demonstrates that he can exercise restraint, and even put it to his advantage. However, just because one can do something does not mean that one does in fact always do that thing. We see this in Zuko's first conflict with Azula. In fact, we see that Azula has mastered the very concept that Zuko is still struggling to internalize. When the two siblings duel in the Avatar state, Zuko, true to form, attacks first, even though he really has nothing to gain by going after Azula, and should instead be helping his uncle clear a path for them to escape. And then, Zuko receives a lesson from his sister on unbalancing one's opponent, as she masterfully maneuvers around him, not fighting back, but instead focusing on destabilizing Zuko physically and psychologically as she taunts him, "Why would father want you back home except to lock you up so you can no longer embarrass him?" When Azula finally does strike, it is only after she has broken Zuko down, and thus ensured the effectiveness of her attack. This precise, calculated style is Azula at her finest, and well worth noting because of the devolvement present in the finale. Azula, at this time, only fights when necessary. She does not waste a single movement or an ounce of energy, in sharp contrast to her aggressive brother and his tendency to attack in a wild and undisciplined fashion. This point of her character is emphasized when the two square off in the Earth King's palace. Well, almost square off. Zuko's impetuous challenge of Agni Kai is rejected by Azula, who lacks his obsession with honor. For Azula, everything is going according to plan in this moment. The Earth King is set up to fall just as she expected. For Zuko, this scene represents the collapse of everything that he and Iroh have built over the past weeks. In an instant, the happy, peaceful life that he had begun to embrace was shattered into 1,000 pieces. And so Zuko lashes out at his sister and attempts to cling to the one vestige of his life that has always mattered to him, his honor. In the Guru, Azula had a purpose driving her, while Zuko was suddenly thrust into a situation in which he had none, causing him to grasp at straws and act rashly. The next time the two siblings face each other in combat, they are on more equal footing, as both have their opposing missions at Boiling Rock. As a result, the fight is more or less a draw, with Sokka helping to even the odds. Zuko is nearing the peak of his character arc here, and Azula has yet to begin her descent, which will commence immediately after this encounter with the betrayals of Mai and Ty Lee. Azula's fraying mental state is then made evident in their next brief showdown in the following episode, as the Fire Nation princess attacks with uncharacteristic aggression and recklessness, very nearly costing her her life, and her failure to eliminate Zuko continues to deepen the self-doubt blooming in her mind, where before had existed only total self-confidence. This brings us back to the Agni Kai itself, the long-awaited duel that will determine the fate and future of the Fire Nation. The history between Zuko and Azula gives this Agni Kai more meaning and weight than one could reasonably expect from most any show, let alone one written to be digestible by 7-year-olds. As their stories have progressed, Zuko has become more centered, grounded, and purposeful. He has learned that fire is not merely an expression of his rage used to destroy, but instead is a source of life. Where once he was lost, frantically holding onto his pride, Zuko is now assured of his mission and his place in the world, which he has accepted with humility and grace. Azula, by contrast, has fallen from grace. Her failure to cultivate meaningful relationships and her domination of her friends through fear has backfired, leaving her alone, paranoid, and desperately grasping at the power which she can feel slipping away from her. When the two siblings square off one last time, it is a poetic reversal of their first duel in the series, and a payoff for the buildup of their encounters in Book 3. Zuko is focused and almost relaxed, while Azula fights with frenzied passion. To be a great firebender, you ironically have to have a cool head, and until recently, Azula had always been the less hot-headed one. Not so now. The clash of character arcs depicted in this Agni Kai is not just wonderful and epic due to the incredible storytelling of the show, however. It is also an absolutely stunning work of visual and audio art. The enormous blasts of fire, enhanced by the arrival of Sozin's comet, sound every bit as devastating as they look, and all of this is backed up by a solemn, ponderous score, the long, slow notes of the violins emphasizing the importance and tragedy of the moment. One of the greatest misfortunes of war is that it tears families apart, and here, that tragedy is exemplified in dramatic fashion. I cannot overstate how hauntingly beautiful these moments are. Unfortunately, I can't play any of the original audio, as this show gets copyright claimed on YouTube with shocking regularity. So seriously, pause this video and go watch the opening of their Agni Kai. You'll see what I mean. As the duel continues, we see an overhead shot of the Fire Nation capital, and begin to realize the destructive power of what is happening in the palace's courtyard, as colossal spurts of flame fly in both directions. This point then hits home in a literal sense when one of Zuko's fire blasts connects with the palace behind Azula, setting it ablaze. That palace represents the only remnant of hope for Azula, for her quest for power. Seeing its imminent destruction, she attacks with increased ferocity. And when that attack fails, we see something new. Azula, exhausted. In prior engagements, Azula was far more controlled and measured, even if outnumbered. Now, despite facing only one opponent of lesser skill, she has overextended and allowed her emotions to dictate her actions. And she does not regroup or recenter herself, but continues to attack frenziedly, heedlessly wasting energy until Zuko finally breaks her base, with his signature move, because of course. At this point, the Agni Kai is all but over. Azula cannot possibly win. She knows it. Zuko knows it. He recognizes that everything that Azula once strove for has crumbled to pieces around her, and that all she has left is her pride. It's a state of mind he knows all too well, and when one's pride, one's honor, is one's only remaining purpose, it is especially vulnerable to attack, and Zuko does just that, taunting Azula for the lack of lightning, goading her into using the technique that is demonstrative of her exceptional prowess as a firebender, because he knows her hubris cannot resist such barbs anymore. Sadly, when pride, the chief of all vices, is on the line, rules and proper procedure tend to go out the window. Zuko underestimates just how desperate Azula is, and although this moment does rob Zuko of his rightfully won victory, it is also necessary for two reasons. First, for Zuko's character arc. Zuko had to learn to live for a greater purpose than his own honor, to sacrifice himself instead of asking others to sacrifice for him. His crowning achievement at the pinnacle of his arc comes as he saves Katara's life by absorbing Azula's lightning bolt. Second, Iroh tells us that if he were to dethrone Ozai as Fire Lord, history would see it as a brother killing a brother to gain power, and the cycle of violence would continue. If Zuko were to defeat Azula and supplant her as Fire Lord, the very same thing could possibly happen. But Zuko subverts the expectations of everyone watching, of the entire Fire Nation, by Instead of taking advantage of Azula's focus on Katara and stepping in to finish her off, he acts as any king should, by putting the good of those who follow him ahead of his own. Avatar the Last Airbender is timeless due to its incredible creativity and storytelling and its stunning visual design. All of those elements are present in this Agni Kai, which, it bears repeating, is simply a sight to behold. I'm not sure if the creators had this duel in mind when they gave Azula blue fire, but man did that choice ever work out. The contrast between the red and blue spurts of flame is just awesome in a way I cannot adequately describe. But more importantly, Avatar lives on in the hearts and minds of its fans because it depicts characters with timeless values and virtues, characters with deep and meaningful arcs that interact and clash in satisfying fashion. All of that is shown here too, in this incredible, epic showdown. Action is not just good because of the spectacle it provides. It needs to be derived from the story and the characters and in turn have an impact on them. Zuko and Azula's Agni Kai checks every box possible, wrapping up their respective character arcs perfectly and setting the stage for the show's beautifully hopeful final scenes. It's so good that it overshadows, in my mind anyway, the duel between Aang and Ozai, and now you know why that is. What do you think? Is this the best fight scene in Avatar? In anything? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.